Alrighty. Are we there yet? No, really. I'm asking, are we there yet? Come on. And woo. Oh yeah, and I forgot to do this. Okay. Right. Oh, and leave that one open. Next set. Next set is next. Yay. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. I apologize for being a little late today. Um, had to throw the air conditioner in my room and turn it on. It's actually starting to get a bit on the warm side. And because, so, funny story. Actually funny. Um, the house I grew up in, and I spent most of my formative years until I was in my early 20s. Uh, it was like, one main floor and then a basement. The basement had the laundry room, it had a living room and the workshop and a couple other things. And the main floor, which is the floor that everybody walked into, you had the kitchen, the bathroom, all the bedrooms, the living room, the dining room. Yeah, fairly simple layout. Fairly old house now, I think from like the 50s or something like that. But, it had it wasn't tall, but it was wide. But that's the kind of house I normally think of you know, when I think of a house. Because I spend, you know, we moved there when I was 4.5. I moved out when I was in my early 20s. Um, before I hit 23, I know that probably by the time I think I moved out, I was like 21 or something. Anyway, um, and so that's what I normally think of. And everywhere I have lived since then, like if it's an apartment, everything's well, for the most part, everything's on the same floor. But apart from that, everywhere else that I've lived, it's been, you have one main floor that's got your living room, your dining room, your kitchen, everything else. But the bedrooms are on a separate floor, usually the level above. I've lived at this house for like over, for about 12 years or whatever. But it still feels odd to me living in a house where the bedrooms are on a separate floor. And that being said, air conditioner gets plugged in, and even though it's like, you know, 20, 21, 22 degrees outside, because this is my room, and my room is on the upper floor, hot air rises, so it gets warmer in here. Plus, I've got my computer in here, so with it running, obviously it gets warmer. So during the summertime, it might only, on a warmer spring day when it might hit like 22, 23, 25 degrees, or, on a cooler summer day, I should say, like warm spring, cooler summer. Um, it can actually get rather warm in here. So even though it's only like 22 degrees outside, I end up having to put the air conditioning in relatively early because otherwise I melt. Because it'll end up hitting 24, 25, 26 degrees, whatever, in the room. also because my room faces west, like the window faces is on the west side. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That means later in the day, it's going to be, I'm going to have the sun coming this way into the room, which also means that when, you know, in the summertime, like it's, only a few minutes after 6 o'clock here in the evening. During the winter time, it's relatively cool out. Not a big deal. But, so the sun comes through, fine, no big deal. Summertime rolls around, and it starts getting a bit warm, which makes me feel, whoever ends up, because there's 3 bedrooms up here, whoever's in the middle room, because their window faces, you know, it's not east and it's not, sorry, it's not east and it's not west, it's on one of the other sides. Um, they don't have to contend with that so much. Anyway, all that's to say, my air conditioning is now in. I did that before the stream started. Not much before the stream started. I think I started putting that in like less than half an hour before the stream started, and stuff had to get moved around. And then I found, by the way, I found a box of cards. So some of you may recognize this list, which is that tiny URL link that I post in the chats. And on the second tab here, I've got this thing of cards I need for various commander decks, sorted by type. And my largest category of stuff that I need right now is lands. But a lot of this is stuff I know I have. I just have to find it. Hey, Halion! Am I? I shouldn't be. I mean, I can... Is that any better? Okay. But yeah, like I was saying, this is the list of cards that I still need for my various commander decks. Oh, no. This is so that tiny URL link that you keep seeing me post in chat, you know where you normally find me. This one, that leads to this page. The second tab there is my list of cards that I have to pin down so I can find them. So I don't have to go hunting for them. And I found a 5-row box, and I knew I had it. I just completely forgot all about it because it was buried under stuff. And then when I went to put the air conditioner in, it's like, oh yeah, I have that thing. And then this third tab here is just so I have a convenient spot to put a blank in case I have to like copy paste it or whatever and work on it elsewhere. So, I think I have it on here. Give me a moment. Yeah, there it is. So I do have, to be fair, this cube layout is about, let me think here. It's over a decade old. But it's 360 cards. And I did use the concept of rarity. And how I handled the concept of rarity was if you if you take a look, there's two columns. I'll use a different. Uh, this might be easier to see. There's two columns, but there's 16 in each column. And what it actually is, for example, these first 8 cards make one theme that I want to see at common. And so it's basically every monocolor gets 4 themes with 8 cards in each theme. And so this first one here for blue is drawing, is card draw. That's something you should be able to get in blue really easily. The second one is stuff that's got high toughness. They tend to do pretty well. Blue tends to do pretty well at walls. This third one deals with flyers. And then this fourth one, because drawing cards isn't enough when you're in blue, it's like top of deck manipulation. Look at the top X card, look at the top 4 cards, put one into your hand, etc., etc. And then for uncommon, I have 5 themes of 3 cards each. So I have 3 counter spells, I have 3 bounce spells, I have 3 for unblockable, 3 for yoink, and then 3 for milling. And then the rares, there's 7 rares. And each one has to do something different. You're not going to find 2 cards that cover the same concept in the same rarity in that color. So, like, you see Pongify. It's the only blue card in here that actually gets a creature off the board, period. You've got Snap, Boomerang, and Seal of Removal that will return it back to him, but they won't kill it out and out. Yeah, I did it that way so I could keep the idea of rarity without, going too far down, the well. And the one thing that I've read about Cube is that if you draft mono red, in general, with people that are not used to building cubes, what you commonly end up with is like a tier 2 legacy deck versus a cube draft deck. Because like a mono red deck, if you pick up a handful of aggro creatures, some decent burn, and some other stuff, you just play a typical mono red aggro deck. And everybody else is like, well, my turn 1 play is land, go. My turn 2 play is land, maybe have something vaguely interesting, go. My turn 3 play is this. But that's how I handled the idea of rarity. And then lands, I want all the dual lands, all the shock lands, all the fetch lands, and then I had a handful of extras. What were the remaining extras? Oh yeah, I had one fetch land that can cover that can get any basic, and then like one more land that is based around a certain color. The 5 allied manlands plus Mishra's Factory, and then what do we got here? And then like 8 additional lands. And then I had a handful of artifacts. I had one card for every for every guild. I had one card for every one card that can be cast off of either color mana for each of the guilds. So like this first column, you have to have both colors. The second column was as long as you've got one of the two colors, you can do it. And then one more for each of the opposing color pairs. And then one for each wedge. Or not each wedge, each shard. That's what I did. I'm still very, very slowly working on physically building it. But that's the way I built. That's the way I sketched mine out. So it would come up with something usable. That being said, where am I? Oh yeah, I can go back to that page. But that's what I did. Because, like I said, I still wanted the feel of rarity in my cube. And so that gave something to work with. And I try to put themes in, like I want a reanimation theme available. So I put, for example, Avatar of Discord, which is generally considered not a great card. But the like Avatar of Discord does two things for this cube. One, it's it's a fast aggressive creature. It's an aggressive creature with a drawback, which actually fits in where one of Black's themes. And when it comes into play, you sacrifice unless you discarded two cards. Well, if you're playing a reanimator strategy and you've got your big creatures in your hand, you can discard them so that you can cast, Zombofire or Exhume or whatever I used in I think I might have put in Burial Rites in there. I forget exactly without looking at it. But I've got a couple of cards in there to help with the reanimation theme. So Avatar of Discord, in general, is not considered a great card. But in a cube where you're trying to support more than one theme, it actually does something pretty decent. So the only recommendations I would generally, since we're still talking the very early stages, the only things I would suggest are consider making some form of rarity, having that fall into place somehow. And keep an eye on what you do more specifically with red to make sure that it doesn't accidentally end up being the most powerful color in your set. Beyond that, I mean, options, they exist. That being said, you popped in at the start of my stream. I am currently looking, so I don't know if you actually paid much attention in the chat, like in where I normally find you, to what I try to cover in these streams. But it's basically I'm going through. I started off with Alpha Beta Unlimited. I'm skipping any core set again until we hit M10 because every core set, after that is just a reprint set. Or sorry, every core set before 10th edition was just a reprint set. And I'm looking at the cards that EDH Rec basically says are at the bottom of the list in terms of, well, like if I go to the top, for example, of this, a lot of people, when you're talking Urza's Legacy and you're talking Commander, Mother of Runes sees a lot of play, Karmic Guide sees a lot of play, Martyr's Cause, okay, you can see it seeing play, Erase, as opposed to Erase, not the Urza's Legacy one. That's a card that you can see seeing play considering the number of enchantments that people forget that a lot of enchantments actually see play in Commander. Yeah. But I'm looking at the bottom end. I'm looking at the stuff that people forget exists. And so I'm looking at, for example, the based on what Scryfall says, EDH Rec says. The least popular white Urza's Legacy card is Opal Avenger. Oh yeah, so do I. In fact, if you take a look at my list of decks that I'm going to be working on, one of them, which is the non-red one, I think it is. Yeah. Hidden, Lurking, Opal, Veiled, which means it's all going to be based on cards like Opal Adventure, Opal Champion, and, red did not get in on that action, but every other color did. So it's all going to be based around stuff like that. And hilariously, Opal Adventure and what were you called? If I got the right name? Come on. Yeah, Lurking Evil, which was in the previous set. Triple black, pay half your life rounded up, becomes a 4/4 Phyrexian horror creature with flying. Combined with Opal Avenger, in a 20 life format, you end up with a 3/5 and a 4/4 flyer for, you can basically play mono black splash white in a normal 20 and normal 60 card format. In Commander, I mean, if you've got 21 or less life, you play the both of them and have fun. Also, Opal Avenger, there's a lot of ways to knock your own life total down. Bolas's Citadel, I think. Yeah, Bolas's Citadel comes to mind. A lot of black cards. Some white cards will do it. But Opal Avenger, I think, is a lot better than most people give it credit for. All you have to do, yes, you start off at 40 lives, so it takes a bit more work, but it doesn't take a lot more work. And it just kicks in as soon as your life total is low. Basically, as soon as you know you've hit single digits, this thing turns on. Which could be in the middle of combat. First strike damage happens, then Opal Avenger turns on. Then you go, oh, cool. Fight spell, kill your biggest creature, or whatever. Fling this at something or whatever. And then your opponent's going, what the hell? And you're still alive. I'm not saying it's a good use of it. Again, casual Commander players. Yeah, whatever. It gets the job done, right? Um, but yeah, there's a bunch of ways to manipulate your life total if that's what you want to do. Expendable troops. Expendable troops is actually not terror bad. You know, tap and sack it to do 2 damage to another creature that's in combat, and it's a 2/1 for 2, on top of that. That's actually pretty good. Sadly, again, one of those cards that got worse with the uh yep. Depending on the green player you're playing against. Block one land and sack it and blow up another one. You know how that goes. How many times have you seen the green player turn around and go, "I'm going to animate all my lands. Cool. Now I'm going to attack with them. Cool, I'll start blowing up your lands. By the way, I'm playing white." Wait, what? Yeah, I remember when Elf Ball was just one of those, quote unquote little kid decks. It took until somewhere around the it took till somewhere around a Lara block, if I remember right, for it to actually get, for a pro player to turn around and do well with it. And then it started getting attention as an actual serious deck. It had always been a deck for like decades. Oh, yeah. Oh, big time. I think in standard, you basically dumped a bunch of elves, and then you had that one Devour Dragon. Um, I can't remember what you're called. Predator Dragon. Predator Dragon was the one that everyone was playing. Because it was 6 mana for 4/4 flying haste. But if you had 6 elves in play, you sacked them all as it came into play. It got 2+1 counters each. So that would make it 16 power. Not in standard. Oh, maybe. No. Well, no. We're talking when Elf Ball started being something that people actually realized could actually be a serious deck. In standard, it was you had Predator Dragon as your top end, and you could suddenly kill somebody out of nowhere, and because of how big it was, you sack. I mean, you sack 2 wells. It's got it's an 8/8, and suddenly your opponent's looking at like a 2-turn clock because they've already taken a couple of points of damage. Not completely unreasonable to play on like turn 4. So suddenly they're like, well, what the hell just happened? Yeah. And then once they open it up in a larger, once they took, well, the standard deck is doing really well. Uh, Dragon Broodmother. If you needed the game to go, like, if you needed more of an attrition style game, maybe. But Predator Dragon was more common because it could just, you know, turn 4 or 5, you were killing somebody from like the high teens out of nowhere and just going, hey, by the way, you're dead now. Dragon Broodmother was okay, But Predator Dragon was the for that format was a much more solid card. And and then when they turn around and start opening it up into other formats, like I think it was extended at that time. I don't no, modern didn't exist yet. Ah, damn it! I keep doing that. This is this 2008. Modern came out in I think 2000. I want to say 2011. So this would have been extended. Yeah, and they just you take something like that and then you add all the elves that you can and a stronger mana base. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that was 1.x, or I think I've even seen it called like 1.7, which felt weird to me, but yeah. I mean, a lot of the old terms feel weird. A lot of terms feel weird to people that are not used to them. I've seen both. 1.x was much more commonly used from what I've come across. Radiance Dragoons, Radiance Dragoons. I don't know. Unless you're playing around Echo, like unless you're playing a deck with Echo being a thing, I don't even. You know what? I don't even think I'd play this, even assuming I'm dealing with Echo. Let me think here. Mana value equal 4. Toughness greater than 3. Oh. Oh yeah, and then ID equal white. One less power, one less life. I'd probably still play, if I'm playing it for the life gain, I'd probably still play Tarot's Faithful. I'd probably still play Light of Emeria over it, because playing it later I can get a bunch more. More realistically, I'm probably playing Dwarven Priest first, and that's a common. Because it's not difficult for me to have 4 other creatures in play by the time I cast the Priest. Are there any... No, that's it. Okay. And I can probably find... Oh, what do you call it? Lone Missionary. If you really want to gain a bunch of life cheap on a body, Lone Missionary does, like, some serious hard work. Like, if you're looking for a life gain card, this sees a lot of pauper play. Because it's cheap, it's a big chunk of life, and it's still a reasonable body. It's still 2 power. Oh yeah. 2 power for 2 mana. Coming to play, gain 4 life. Think about this against, like, a red-based aggro deck. I have a blocker that's a reasonable size. And on top of that, I've just neutralized your lightning bolt and still gain life over a lightning bolt and counteracted like fire blast. Oh yeah. Oh, if you're talking a draft format of any sort, yeah, lone missionary is just silly for life gain. Um, and it comes down 2 turns before Radiant Dragoons, and there are much better cards. There's much better cards you can get even at 4 mana. Radiance Dragoons, I would honestly put relatively low on the list. And the other thing to look at, and I've mentioned this in the last couple of streams, if you're looking at gaining life in Commander, you have 2 things to consider, like to decide between, because one is going to be more important than the other. Gain a bunch of life at once, or a bunch of instances of, a bunch of smaller instances of life gain. And I think that's the right one. Because there's sometimes when gaining life a bit at a time, but getting multiple instances is more important. And there's going to be times when gaining a bunch of life at once. Yeah, okay. So, a Johnny's Pride Mate. This is a sort of card where if you're gaining 5 life, you would rather have gain 1 life, gain 1 life, gain 1 life, gain 1 life, gain 1 life. Because that's 5 separate triggers that care about you gaining life. That would make this into a 7/7. Compare that to Well of Lost Dreams, where I gained 5 life in 1 hit. Well, now I can pay any amount of mana up to, in this case, up to 5, to draw that many cards in one shot. So there's going to be times when gaining more life at once is more relevant than gaining life, a bunch of smaller instances of gaining life. Radiance Dragoons is the kind of card that you play if you're looking to gain more life in 1 hit. Generally speaking, not always true, generally speaking though, I think it's generally better to have like 5 instances of gain 1 life rather than 1 instance of gain 5 life. Or, gain 2 and gain 3, or gain 2, gain 2, gain 1, or something of that nature. Have more smaller triggers instead. So, Radiance Dragoons, in general, I would pass on. And if you really need to gain 5 life in 1 hit, I think there's probably better ways to do it. Sort by mana value. You can do that for as little as 1 mana. Starlight Invoker, Starlight Invoker would be better because you can do it consistently. Words of Worship, you can do it consistently, especially if you've got any sort of card draw attached to it. Um, Airdrop Aeronauts would not be bad for something like that. Bulwark Giant. +1/+1 over Radiant Dragoons for an extra 2 mana, which sounds about right because, generally speaking, Echo knocks 1 mana off the actual cost. So this should be a 5 mana card if it didn't have Echo. This is 6 mana for an extra +1/+1. And Linvala, depending on how much life gain you've hit so far, if you haven't hit much, there's a good chance somebody's got more life than you by then. So, although I might be looking at Sunbeam Spellbomb first because it's a cheap artifact. You can recur that fairly easily. I don't know, but that's where my brain goes. Opal Champion. Oh man, Opal Champion. All that has to happen is somebody casts a creature spell, and suddenly you get a 3/3 first striker, and it costs you 3 mana, which is not bad, especially when you're looking at common. This is actually pretty good. It's so easy to get somebody to cast their, cast their command or cast their, you know, it's not unreasonable for a typical. I would say a typical deck is probably about a third creatures. I think that's, you know, if you basically take every deck that exists, like every actual deck that exists, not every theoretical deck, but every deck that actually exists that somebody has built, and average them all out. I assume it's going to be likely you're probably going to hit somewhere around 30 to 40% creatures. For somebody, and yes, there's always going to be exceptions. I think Opal Champion is going to be really easy to turn on. Defender of Law. Defender of Law, I think, is cute. It's not crazy, but 3 mana, flash and protection from red. Red, as a monocolor, I would assume, like, black and green are going to be at the top of the list. I think black and green are the two colors most likely to be played as mono. And the two color, like, they're probably the two colors most likely to see play in Commander, period. A lot of decks are going to be built based on them being mono, and a lot of decks are going to have them as one of the 2 or 3 other colors in the deck. And if you're playing 4 or 5, it's really easy to build it with a higher skew towards green to help fix your mana. Red, I think, gets... I think blue is probably the least likely to be built as a monocolor. I think white and red fight it out for, like, the second tier. I would assume red probably edges out, but that could go either way. But red quite often gets thrown into a lot of decks as a second or third color, regardless of which way you're building it. You know, whether you're building your commander first, you know, pick your commander and then build your deck, or build your deck and then pick your commander. Regardless of which way you do it. God damn it. Regardless of which way you do it, I think red is probably mid-range in terms of like how often it gets played. I think it gets played a lot more as a second or third color rather than being monocolored. So, Defender of Law, the fact that it's got flash is going to make it really fun. You know, you can have somebody go try and do something crazy like, oh, what's the card I'm thinking of? Blasphemous Act. And follow it up with some kind of biorhythm effect. And in response, you go, hey, by the way, you know, Defender of Law. Even Defender of Law, in response to the, you know, even in response to the Blasphemous Act. Oh, even funnier, if they somehow manage to go biorhythm in response, somehow, Blasphemous Act, he's back. And then in response to that, you play Defender of Law and go, cool, I'm still going to have a creature. I don't think it's great, but I think it's good, and I think if you've got a way to give this thing flying, you're going to wreck the day of a lot of red players. The funny thing is, we went from, like, for the white cards, we started pretty meh at the bottom, but we're already getting up to, like, stuff that's reasonably playable. I want to pronounce your name that way. I'm sure it's wrong, but I want to pronounce it that way. Squitch. Squitch, squitch, squitch. I honestly don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced. Hope and Glory. If you've got any creatures in your deck that care about being targeted, squish. That you know the general term that commonly gets used for foods like pumpkins and and similar shape, you know, foods, right? The general term is squash. In our family, we call them squish. Oh man, Hope and Glory. I just realized you really want to play this in a deck that's got like heroic stuff going on. You're building a deck around heroic or something else that cares about being targeted. Hope and Glory ends up being really good because you target two different things. Sustainer of the Realm. Let me think here. I don't know. Sustainer of the Realm feels just like most of the time this is just going to end up being a 2/5 flyer, which is going to work out to a 3/4, which is about what you should be getting for 4 mana. Like, even back then, when you compared it to Sarah Angel, which was an extra mana, you got a 4/4 Flying Vigilance for 5 mana. So 3, 4, 2, 5. You could have made this a 3. You could have made this back. I think you could have got away with just making this a 2/5 flyer straight up. But I think they wanted. I think they wanted it. I think they wanted it to look more interesting than what it was. I think that's what happened. They wanted it to look like it did more than it really did. Because the problem with Sustainer of the Realm is the likelihood of you being able to block multiple. I mean, it's not impossible. Don't get me wrong. It's not impossible that it could end up blocking multiple times in a single turn. But that requires somebody to be, as a general rule of thumb, that requires somebody to be playing red. Because you're going to need effects like World at War and Aggravated Assault and other similar methods for gaining extra combat steps in the same turn to pull it off. And if you're doing that, Sustainer of the Realm, she could get herself a really big butt if she wanted to. She could make J-Lo nervous. Nervous. Novus? Nervous. I know the... Whatever. At which point you probably want something in your deck so you can make use of that extra toughness to kill somebody off. But that's another story. And as weird as it sounds saying this, that sounds like a meta, but being a casual player and talking to casual players, that sounds like a metagame call. And what I mean by that is, if there are people in your play group who are likely to have decks like that, or likely to be playing decks like that, if you're already playing white, you might want to consider Sustainer of the Realm. Beyond that, yeah, there's generally speaking, there's better cards than that. Devout Harpist, I think it doesn't take much for this to, like, in terms of power creep, based on when it was created, i.e., the card I'm thinking of probably already exists by now. For this to... Oh! I just realized. I was about to say for this to become, destroy target enchantment. I just realized this is just a tap ability. This is not tap and sack. That makes it a lot better than I expected. Because you can keep killing your opponents if they've got effects like Rancor or Draconic Destiny or, anything that's there to, basically they're trying to build a Voltron deck with enchantments. You can just go, kill it, kill it, kill it. And the flip side of that is if somebody is looking at your stuff and going pacifism and lignify and utopia's utopia vow and maybe utopia spell on their own stuff. But their removal is largely that. Devout heart, face fetters, most of which, I'll be honest, are the kind of cards that I like to recommend to people to put in their decks because Kenris Transformation. There we go. There's another one. Because sometimes the best way to get rid of an opponent's general isn't to kill it. It's to leave it on the battlefield, neutralize it, and let them deal with it. And you get a card like Kenris Transformation out there. And suddenly they've got a creature in play. Sure, it's their general, and it's sitting in play with no abilities, so it can't do any of the stuff that it's known for. And now all it is it's a 3/3 creature. And when people are building decks around a general with the assumption that the general does something, like Ishin, for example. Ishin, 2 heavens is 1. That, combat triggers trigger a second time. For this to be turned into a 3/3 with no abilities, they turn around and go, that just turned off like half of what my deck does. And Ishin is a sword card that wants to be in play. Not like some generals like Olero, which personally I still have a strong dislike for this card. That's a me problem. I fully admit this is a me problem. Because this does not need to come into play to be able to do anything. And it has an effect on the rest of the game. And you can just sit there and build, your typical boring Esper control deck. And not even bother with a win con, just make sure you keep recycling your deck. Yeah. I personally don't like that for a format like Commander. But that's, again, I'm well aware that's a me problem. But a card like Kenris Transformation works really good to shut down people's commanders. Now you take a look at Devout Harpist, and it's like, if somebody is going to put that in their deck, my response is good for you. Because it's literally tap, destroy target card that's stopping my general from doing his job or her job. Or tap, destroy target card that's that's making things really really difficult for me to deal with. Sure, it's on your creature, but now it's making my blocks even harder, or this, that, whatever. And the funny thing is, the Oracle text has actually made it slightly stronger. The original text, target creature enchantment was basically an aura that had to attach to a creature, is what they meant. Now it's destroy target aura attached to a creature. That could be something that had enchant permanent. That could be an aura that said, enchant creature, enchant creature or vehicle. So on. Basically, any aura that somehow can viably, hey Holly, any aura that can somehow viably end up on a creature can now be targeted by this. um, you know, a creature that's got bestow that's ended up on another creature. Hell, yeah. So this can actually hit a lot more cards than it first appears. And this also affects a class of cards that I think people should be playing more of, which is kind of interesting to say. Peace and Quiet. It's kind of funny. I think this. I'm I'm not positive on this, but I think Urza's Legacy, or well, I should say Urza block, is the first time we actually see, because green has had the ability to blow up artifacts specifically for a very long time. The first card I remember specifically to blow up artifacts in green was from Arabian, or not Arabian, Antiquities, and that was Crumble, and that made it into Revised. But white, for the most part, handled enchantments and artifacts. You know, cards that generally did one could do either. This, I think, was the first time we really had white turn around and specifically hit just enchantments. Because we would get Peace and Quiet, and, you know, a little further down, we also got Erase, and actually a couple of other cards. But white commonly got hit with both. Green commonly could do one or the other. Yeah, I know. Urza's, and yeah, you know, Holly's got a very true point. The problem that happened with Urza block in general, it was designed to be a deck based around enchantments, which is why we had the opal creatures and the lurking creatures, and we had cards like Devout Harpist and so on and so forth. The problem was that even though the artifacts were a less common, uh, I was gonna say theme, but that's not really the word I'm looking for. Like, even though they were a less common component, just the power that was available to them compared to what you could get out of it playing with enchantments made them really, really strong. And so, Urza block in general, it had this reputation for being artifact themed. Plus, you're dealing with Urza, who's an artificer. The story is about Urza, who's an artificer. So there's that going for it too. And then you got stuff like, you know, I think this block also gave you your Palancrons, your Great Whales, your Peregrines, and other similar cards that would let you untap extra lands, and that just made things just off the scale. If it wasn't if it wasn't for the, I would probably bet that you could knock off, like if you took off probably, you'd probably have to knock off like 15, at least 15 egregious cards in terms of power and theme. And if you did that, you could probably get people to actually see that, hey, yeah, Urza block is based on enchantments. But it would probably take knocking like 15 cards out. You know, your Tellurian Academy, like Tellurian Academy, Grim Monolith, um, uh, uh, the one that got emergency banned, Memory Jar. I bet I could go through. I could probably go through like a list and find like 15 cards and just go, okay, well, if these not necessarily didn't exist, but were tweaked so they wouldn't be so insane. Even in standard, even in block, they were insane. You know, being able to play like 6 mana threats by like turn 2, sort of thing. Yeah, it got that crazy. And then when we got to like Mercadian Masks in the next block, the power level was such. Apparently, from what I remember, Urza, the response at Wizards from Urza block was, "Hey, this block, but sold really well. But if you ever do something this again, you're fired." And so we end up with Mask block as much toned down at a much toned down power level. Iron Will. Iron Will's got a couple of fun things going for it. One, it's got. I mean, first of all, it cycles. So in a pinch, you pay 2 mana, you ditch it, you draw a new card. Not a big deal, but it means it's never going to be useless. It will still be pay to draw a card. Number two, it targets anything that cares about targeting a creature. If you're playing a deck like Feather, let's say. Was it Feather the Redeemed? I think. Yeah. Which is like a 3/4 flyer, and basically any instant or sorcery that you cast that targets one of your creatures, including Feather. The last part of casting a spell, in general, is if it's something that if it's a permanent, the last step is making it into the permanent it's supposed to be, and if it's an instant or sorcery, the last step is putting it in your graveyard. And Feather says that if you're to put an instant or sorcery into your graveyard, as a result of casting it, you put it into your hand. A lot of people have built Feather. It's dangerous. It's silly. It's all sorts of things. Now, if you want the more friendly version of it, Iron Will just simply means you get to make it into a 3/8 every turn. But then you can turn around and do Heroic. Am I playing with something like Heroic? Something that cares about being targeted. Tethmos the High Priest, as an example. I lightning bolt your priest. In response, I cast Iron Will. It's going to survive. And by the way, thank you for letting me get my Johnny's Pride Mate back. Because just run that mythic enchantment from the Streets of New Capano, but when you cast a spell, so is it Capana or Capana Commander? This thing? Yep. We knowing how to search. Yay. But yeah, the other place that you might want to put a card like Iron Will is if you're building a deck that has white in it that cares about toughness, like Doran the Siege Tower. And, or a deck that's running high alert, maybe. And suddenly, this is 1 mana, giving a creature essentially +4 to damage. Yep. Each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. This essentially gives the creature you're targeting +4/+4. At least as far as combat's concerned. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a thing. I think Chromium helps with that. Oh, no, Chromium's just the... Oh, no, not Chromium, Arcades. Yeah. Arcades the Strategist is a common general if you're doing Bant. And, yep. And High Alert commonly ends up in that deck so that you don't end up having to have your general out to be able to get the combat damage happening and have other things going on. Yeah. And Iron Will would actually be a pretty decent card for that deck. I mean, there's more than one, I'm sure. Whoops. Yes, I did mean Angelic Chorus. Yes. And I'm sure there's more than one card that does that. And again, I mentioned Radiance Dragoons. Angelic Chorus would be much better than Radiance Dragoons for that kind of deck. I think the only place that I would feel comfortable playing Radiance Dragoons would be a thematic deck, like a deck based around Radiant and the Weatherlight crew, and Radiant was Sarah's realm, which means stuff from Homelands, I think, comes into play at that point. Yeah. Purify Shatterstorm, Tranquility, and 1 accept its weight. Shatterstorm being red, Tranquility being green, Let's merge them together. Hey, by the way, it's a white card now. But that makes sense because, you know, this is Disenchant as a mass removal spell. Any excuse to use Homelands cards is a good excuse. I think this card is like, I think this card is also commonly like green these days. Though not necessarily. I do know for an extra mana though, you get cards like Bane of Progress. When it comes into play, it gets that as a triggered ability, and then gets bigger for basically, how many things did I blow up? Oh, I blow up like 8 things? Cool, I'm now a 10/10. Purify is, don't get me wrong, Purify is still good. The fact that it's a sorcery can be a mark in its favor. It's just a card like Bane of Progress, to be honest, a different color, so that can also be relevant. Bane of Progress is generally the better card. And then Cessation. Cessation. I would prefer this so much. Like here's the thing. No, it's trying to be like the anti-Rancor, because Rancor makes you want to attack, because, you know, giving +2 power and trample is quite a bit. Yeah, but that's the problem. If it was pacifism for this cost with the, you know, with the self-recursion, it would actually be playable. As far as I'm concerned, it would be playable. Actually, probably even now, because pacifism, for that cost, now we're starting to look at arrest. Or basically something stronger than pacifism for pacifism's cost. But the self-recursion does a lot. But all this does is it stops the creature from being able to attack. Have I got the right card in mind? Yes. Sluggishness. Cost-wise, this makes more sense. 1 red, 1 other. Enchant creature can't block, with the same drawback. This is 2 mana. This is 3. I think they should have made this into a pacifism with this ability, or knocked a mana off. Either one probably would have been fine. But Cessation, honestly, I would put Cessation in terms of like playability, etc., much further down on the list. I would probably put, personal opinion, I would probably put Radiance Dragoons right at the bottom, because these guys are actually playable. Oh my god, Marsky! Marsky bought Vintage Killer! Oh god. What's it been, like 2 months since you were last in? I know you have kids. I know you've got a family. I know. And you're also like a few time zones away. You're what are you? UTC plus 1, I think. Oh, that'll do it. Wait, you have your... I thought that was a multiplication symbol for a sec. You have your own company, then you should have more time. Other people should be writing it for you. Yeah, so as you can probably tell, I'm doing Urza's Legacy tonight. Huh. I just noticed. So, and you might be able to tell, I'm doing this, you know, sorted by how Scribefall says EDH rank sorts them. You know, i.e., best card to worst card, yada yada yada. But direction descending, which means the stuff that is basically the stuff that has the lowest rating comes first. You know, higher rating, obviously better card in this context. And I just noticed the third worst card from for blue in Urza's Legacy is the 3 mana 2/1 Wood Protection from red. Where was it? Number 5 is a 3 mana 2/1 Wood Protection from red in white. What? Whoops. There we go. So, Vigilant Drake I can see. Again, I might disagree with the way some of this stuff is organized. Vigilant Drake looks to me like it's expecting to be a combo piece. Because, yeah, 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer doesn't sound great. But pay 3 to untap it. So, well, I was thinking Heavy Arbalist. Because, you know, a quick creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. A quick creature has tap. This creature deals 2 damage to any target. So, tap, take 2. Pay 3 to untap it. Tap, take 2. You can machine gun stuff pretty hard when you've got a Heavy Arbalist and something that can untap itself easily. And if you've got a way to generate, yeah, I mean, there's a few ways to do that. But that being said, as a general rule, if you're playing red, if a person is playing red and they see a card along lines of Arcane Teachings or Fire Whip or what have you, they're like, yeah, okay, that tracks. If you're playing blue, unless you've been playing for a unless the people in your group have been playing for a long time, like a really long time, they're not going to expect blue to go, you know, and start machine gun downing creatures. You know, Prodigal Sorcerer et al. Have been out of the common Magic playing lexicon for probably the better part of 15 years now. when was the last time realistically that we saw blue pingers in a commonly played set? Well, yeah, Marsky, that's also because you, like myself, have been playing a very long time. I know you have. I have. I know Holly has. We would expect that. But Squish, I don't think, would be expecting it. Um, yeah, exactly. Hallian, I don't remember when he started. I think he might be newer than that. But, basically, if you've only been playing for like 15 years or less, you unless you actually have gone, unless you've actually gone searching through older cards for whatever reason, you're probably not going to be familiar with the idea that blue back in the day had creatures that could ping to deal damage to any target. You're not going to be used to the idea of having Psionic Blast as a burn spell. This is not going to be. This is going to be weird to you. Uh huh. So, Marsky, does that mean you've been playing Omniscience, or are you playing like, or have you been playing like a Cheerios style deck? No, he's playing Omniscience. Are you playing that silly standard deck with Abuelo's whatever it's called? I can't remember what it's called, but Abuelo's something or other. Abuelo's Awakening. Yeah, why am I not surprised? Do you know what I found is I I was today years old when I realized that nope, wrong one. Um what's the not cast down? Yeah, you've never played zero mana cards before, right? Oh, what was it? Damn it. That's the card I was thinking of. That's the card I was thinking of. This can kill an Omniscience that had an Abuelo's, that came into play via Abuelo's Awakening. Yeah, I had to go back through chat logs through my other chat program. The thing that how I found Marsky initially. It's just different servers. It was a different server. It was a different time. Yada yada yada. But yeah, uh, I realized like today or yesterday, I forget which it was, that this can take out an Omniscience that came into play via Abuelos because Abuelos brings it back into play as a 1/1 flying spirit. It only gets any bigger if you actually spend mana on X. If you don't, it's a 1/1 flying spirit. which means the omniscience can do, and for those that don't know what card I'm actually talking about, is this, this expensive beastie. 10 mana. You may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. Yeah. But, yeah, that, putting, you find ways to get omniscience into your graveyard. You know, you dig with cards that say draw cards and then make you discard cards. Anything along the lines of thirst for knowledge kind of effects. Yeah, Holly basically doing that. Then reanimate it with reanimate the omniscience with Abuela's Awakening. And then you use that in combination with, and then you're digging for another combo piece to basically make you go infinite. Which was Invasion of Arcavios. I think I spelled that right. When it enters, search your library, graveyard, and or outside the game for an instant or sorcery card you own. Reveal it and put it in your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle. The first thing that you want to do when you cast... when Omniscience comes into play is, ideally, you want to use that to cast a second Omniscience. Because this one, if the first one gets blowed up, you still have you still have, like, a full-on version. Then you want to be digging for your invasion and then use that to loop with something that will actually win you the game and bounces the invasion. But all that being said, yeah, so Marsky is a terrible Magic player, and Marsky is a bad Magic player, and he should feel bad. Coming from the guy who played like Mono Black Reanimator when it was a terrible, terrible deck in Standard. Oh man, I was playing Rotting Regisaur and Davriel and Blood for Bones, and I forget what the other reanimation spell was. Yeah. And that was a fun standard. But that was terrible. When was this? M20, so 2019. So that's like 6 years ago now. 5, 6 years ago. By the way, Marsky, you still speak with you still talk to Brassy at all? I don't remember, but you still talk to Brassy at all? Or like any of that crew? Nice. Nice. You should tell him. He needs more ATOGs, right? Should see if you can convince a couple of them to pop into my stream once in a while. Actually, now I'm curious. Oh no. Uh oh my god, it's only a $2 card. Yeah, it's only a $2 card. Yeah, my problem is my problem is being able to actually, like, if we're talking physically, my problem is actually being able to leave. You know, I it's the financial problem, not the. That being said, I would feel more comfortable heading to the Netherlands given the current climate than, popping down to visit them. But I would like to pop down and visit them. I just, unfortunately, they live in the States, and, well, considering the current political climate, I'll just leave that there. Yeah, we're not gonna go there right now. I mean, you can always come to Canada. Nice. But yeah, Vigilant Drake again. The other thing people have to remember when it comes to commanders, if you're looking to generate infinite mana, it's actually really easy. I miss being able to talk to PV regularly in the channel. He was actually kind of fun to chat with. Um, the easiest cards I can think of to combo, like, I still remember, for if you want to build infinite mana in a blue deck. There's a few ways to do it. Actually, hold on. What was that one that I was being told to plug in? Oh yeah, Boop. That'll get you to this list of decks that I'm looking at. And I am currently looking at this one, which is, what was it? Right. Grand Architect and Pili Pala. Spend a blue to make Pili Pala into a blue creature. Tap it via the Architect to generate 2 colorless. Use that 2 colorless and the untap ability of Pili Pala to make a mana of any color. Doing that, you can generate infinite blue mana, or infinite mana of any color or color combination you want, rather. It costs you 1 blue to get started, and then you just combo off there and generate as much mana as you want. Oh yeah, Marski, you probably remember I like building weird decks. I've taken it a little bit more so with Commander. This particular list here, my blue deck, it tries to play like a green ramp deck does, but it runs like 19 basic islands. Have fun looking it over. You would enjoy it. And then my mono green deck feels like an Esper control deck. Um, feels like an Esper control deck that beats down with flying creatures. That's a green deck. Mono red, I'm building based off of Squee Goblin Nabob. It's a Voltron deck that loads him up with auras. At least half a dozen or so. No, Canopy Dragon, I think, got cut. I think Canopy Dragon might have got cut from that one. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's in there, but I think the actual physical build of it doesn't run Canopy Dragon anymore because we've had a few green dragons come out. Well, a few green flyers come out since then. Um, I know I cut Scrib Sprites because they just didn't do enough. I mean, they're really good for, you know, a like a 60 card 20 life format, but for, for a format like Commander, they just don't do enough. But I have God, I hate how stupid standard is now. Then I remember playing during Necro and I'm fine with Omni. Yeah. I got my hands on Old Gnawbones, and there's a couple other green dragons. Uh, the the green version of the green analog to Junji, I forget what it's called. And I've also replaced the Elder Druid and the Navineros disc with how much did Tarkir affect the standard? Um, an actual reasonable amount because like the Omen dragons, for example, are really good in general. Um, yeah. Oh, the Red Dragon Storm is funny. Have you seen that deck? Well, yeah. So you are there any cards in Standard to exile artifacts? No, exile. Sort by color. Dusker's Reliquary, Exercise. Oh, Glass Casket's back. Oh, that only hits a creature. What? Oh, when this. Okay, yeah. So white should be okay with it. Blue is kind of boned. Black is kind of boned. Oh, wow. It's Johnny! Green. Green will be fine. More green. Felden's King coming back looks weird. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that, I mean, even though Red's got ways to deal with it, realistically, your first option isn't until you hit 3 mana. Oh man, is it crazy that I see, Territory Forge and suddenly my brain wants to go, hey, by the way, standard Ponza? No idea if it's going to be, if it's going to, well, yeah, temporary lockdown is just good in general. Yep. But yeah, like I was saying, uh, mono blues, like, there's lots of ways to generate infinite mana, and you combine that with tap to do a thing. Tap enchant creature to do a thing, and you can basically go infinite. Fleeting Image. Fleeting Image to me feels like it wants to be in a deck that runs Omniscience or one of its variants or Allurin. But then you end up having to, if you want to do something like Allurin, again, you end up having to do what I just said about Vigilant Drake and generate a crazy amount of mana. Although, let's be honest, that flavored text is kind of adorable. Horace swore off drinking, but after meeting the creature a second time, he decided he'd better start again. Yeah. Or, I mean, any intruder alarm in that context, I think would work best if you had a way to, like, a creature that you could tap for at least 2 mana, one of which was blue. I hate people making me play out the Omni Kill. Well, let's be honest. I'm trying to remember. I know I was watching Goldfish. I can't remember if it was Krim or Seth, and I think it was Seth. He actually made the person play out the Omni Kill because he says a lot of people don't know how to actually win, and while I understand you know how to win, if it's somebody that doesn't know you from a hole in the ground, and they're gonna follow Seth's lead, which is a fair comment. Do you actually know how to win the game with us? Because some people will just, I'm sure you've seen before. Yeah, yeah. If you've shown that you can perform the leap, yeah. If you've shown that you can perform the loop and you know what you're doing, that's one thing. The other thing is maybe, maybe they think. I'm thinking maybe if they're doing it that way, they think maybe they might be able to get the match on time. Because it's going to take you an extra minute or two to go through the iterations and do it all. Maybe 3 minutes. Which, yeah. And maybe they, because sometimes, like, let's be honest, if I'm playing against you, I'm going to, if I'm playing against you and I know I don't have much choice, if I'm playing against you and I know I don't have any good ways to try and beat you, I'm at the point where I have to hope you make a mistake somehow. And if you make a mistake and I'm able to win, I mean, it's like that. I'm going to keep bringing this up over and over and over and over again. But it's like that one time we played on, what was it, Cockatrice? And I played Oath. And I knew you made a mistake when we were talking about deck construction. And I let you assemble Vault Key and you couldn't win. No, it wasn't Moto. Pretty sure it wasn't Moto. Because I did not have the cards for Oath of Druids. Yeah, because you insisted on playing Sphinx of the Steel Wind as your win con. And was it Chain of Vapor as your removal? And all I had to do was Oath out to Iona. And when I finally realized, after the conversations that we had, oh, right, this is you I'm playing against. This is how you built your deck. I'm naming blue. I let you assemble Vault Key. And you finally turn around and go, I can't win. After going and drawing a few cards, it's like, yeah, go ahead. You couldn't win. Oh, yeah. Why do you think I kept telling you for, like, more than... I kept telling you, you should have something that is... You should have something in your 75 somewhere so that you don't get color hosed when this sort of thing happens. Because it's like, considering how strong blue in general is, in the dark, if you don't know what to name, to be fair, people that don't know what we're talking about, Marsky and I were playing Vintage. And I was playing Oath of Druids, and I don't remember exactly what Marsky was playing at that point. But we're testing on, from what I remember, a third-party program. And he had Sphinx of the Steel Wind, which is, white, blue, black, like 5/5 or no, I think it was a 6/6 with a huge suite of abilities. And I was playing Oath of Druids and Iona Shield of Emeria as my primary win condition in the deck. And Oath of Druids, basically the way it works is if your opponent has more creatures in play than you on your upkeep, you get to mill till you hit a creature, drop that creature directly into play. And this happens equally for both players. But obviously, since you're playing Oath of Druids, you build with it in mind, and so therefore it generally affects you more than your opponent does, more than it does your opponent. And we're talking vintage. And vintage at that point, I think we're talking over a decade ago, was very, very blue heavy. And so Iona, Shield of Emeria, in the dark, if you don't know what you're playing against, yeah, Forbidden Orchard was really good in that deck. Um, in the dark, if you don't know what you're playing against, and you get an Iona in play, you should name, at least at that point, you should name blue. There's generally some cards that'll give you a good idea what to, but in the dark, if you don't know what else to name blue. And that shuts down Force of Will, that shuts down Ancestral Recall, that shuts down Misdirection, that shuts down, you know, Gush, and a whole, basically a giant swath of relevant cards for for Vintage. Shuts down Tinker. Yeah, shuts down your Time Twister, Time Walk, a bunch of actual cards that are actually important to the format. In fact, cards like Demonic Tutor, being black, yep, cards like Demonic Tutor are quite often being used to, I would probably say as a guess, a third of the time, being used to fetch one of these broken blue cards. Because you want for Time Walk, you want for Time Twister, you want for Ancestral, so on and so forth. Yeah, and I was telling you, you should run, like, in your 75 somewhere. Like in your sideboard, you should run, like, Diabolic Edict or something. And white cards commonly get commonly get used to hold the game down. Slow the game down, get rid of your opponent's threats until your blue cards can take over. And green and red usually just end up being splash colors. Usually. At least historically speaking. Again, we're talking like a decade or so ago. So, but Marsky had a slot, I think it was like one slot available in his main deck for, dealing with threats of some sort. Theoretically, think, you want like Vindicate or Boomerang or something that can get rid of a problem permanent. Get it off the board for now. And I got Iona into play, and his removal of choice was Chain of Vapor, which could return a permanent off the board, and the control of that permanent could, sack a land, I think was, to bounce it back, and so this is why it's the chain, because it can bounce back and forth and back and forth, as long as people are willing to pay the additional, sack a land and make another copy. And in some decks, you use that, you sack your own lands to bounce a bunch of your own powerful cards, like, your Mox Jets and your Soul Rings and other stuff that can generate more mana than they cost. Bounce them, generate a big storm count, and then, use something like tendrils for the win. But that's not what he was using it for. He was using it just plain as, hey, you've got a problem, I've got to deal with it. Let's get it off the board. Which made sense. But his win condition was Sphinx of the Steel Wind, and I'm playing Iona, and Iona's a 7/7, and he's got a 6/6 with a bunch of abilities. Two of which are protection from red and from green. Voltaic Key, back then. I let him assemble Vault Key, which Marsky's pulled up in the chat. Basically, it's a 2-card combo consisting of 2 very inexpensive cast artifacts that allow you to consistently untap the key and tap it and get infinite turns. I let him assemble that. But he got to Sphinx of the Steel Wind, and he couldn't play it because Iona says, as it enters, you name a color as it enters, not when, as. I name blue, and your opponents cannot cast spells that are that color. So he can't play his win condition, and even if he could get it into play in some other way, he wouldn't be able to attack through Iona, because Iona's bigger than the Sphinx, and that just happened. Hold on a sec here. Where are you? You are here. And you pop out. So there was that problem. And then there was the problem that his removal, his card that he tried to use to get Iona off the board, was also blue. And he couldn't cast that either. So once I realized that, all I had to do was go, okay, I named blue. And he literally could not win. He could, I wouldn't even have to attack, and I could just sit there and watch him draw his card for a turn, even if he played nothing else, because he had already drawn a bunch due to Vault, the Time Vault Voltaic Key combo. He had already drawn so many cards that it was just, I would win due to him dying due to deck death. All permanents are colorless. The problem with Thran Lens, Holly, is that Thran Lens only works once a card's already in play, because it says all permanents. It does not affect spells. I'm not saying it was a really good option, Marsky, but considering you were playing with a card that had protection from green and red, you probably could have got away with Vindicate. At that point, you might have been able to get away with Vindicate. It wasn't an amazing option, but it would have worked. Actually, you had access to Beast Within at that point. Beast Within would have been a much better answer in that circumstance. I understand it's not blue, but that also would have worked to your benefit. Your win con was 3 colors, and this is part of the reason why back then, uh, for Tinker, there were like 4 options. Yeah, yeah, Mycosynth Lattice would have got around it. The problem is Mycosynth Lattice is 6 mana, and he was not playing. He was not on workshops. You're on shops. You can get away with playing Mycosynth Lattice because sometimes that's like 2 or 3 mana. Tap 2 or 3 lands and shut down a lot of things. Not off the top of my head, but I will say it's nice to be able to talk shop with you. But anywho, uh, Weather Seed Fairies. Yeah, Serum Powder doesn't see much play anymore, does it? Oh my god. Do you remember when I was trying to get people to play One Letter Legacy with me? I had. Okay, so TLDR, One Letter Legacy, build a Legacy legal deck with one additional restriction. See you, Holly! Build a Legacy legal deck with the additional restriction that apart from your 5 standard basic lands, everything else in your deck has to start with the same letter. I managed to come up with a Seismic Swans deck. Seismic Assault plus Swans of Bryn Argyle, and I had Serum Powder in that deck. And that deck was actually kind of silly. I think I ran 44 lands. 44 sounds right. Seismic Assault, Swans of Bryn Argyle, Serum Powder, and something that had Cascade that started with S. It was an enchantment, I'm pretty sure. Stormcaller's Boon. Yeah, I think it was those 4 cards and then like 44 lands, including Scalding Tarns and basically any. I wanted most of my lands to be able to produce red, like as many lands as I could that could produce red, and then everything else was like white or blue. And that was great. But Brassy definitely went up me because I forgot what deck I was trying to build at that point, but he managed to get Elfdrazi on me with elves ramping into Emrakul the Eon's Torn. Yeah, that was fun though. Uh, I did manage to come up with an infinite turn combo with and keep in mind we're talking legacy legal. It was, I think, Thopter Assembly and Time Civ. Copy link. Take a quick scan at this. Because this is a long time ago that we were talking about. Duplicant. What did Duplicant actually do? Oh, it was a cheap. Okay, right. You're playing shops, which means you're playing Mishra's Workshop. You're running your 4 ancient tombs. You're running a bunch of artifacts, which makes Tolarian Academy easy to support. Duplicant is your creature removal of choice that just happens to get you a win con at the same time. If you use Duplicant to exile, let's say, Iona, you've tapped probably 2 lands and got yourself a 7/7 for it. Karn Silver Golem, animated artifacts, which, amongst other things, got really useful when you could go pay 1 mana, blow up your opponent's Mox Emerald or other Moxen. Chalice of the Void in play is a 0 mana artifact because X equals 0. So Karn can blow that up. Bunch of other stuff like that. Lodestone Golem makes stuff cost more. Your power cards like your Lotus, your Moxen, Mana Crypt, and all that jazz. Chalice of the Void to counter stuff. Crucible of Worlds lets you replay lands like your Strip Mine and your 4 Wastelands. Serum Powder to help with your mulligans. Smokestack to make people sacrifice stuff. If it, you know what I might. Hey, Marsky, crazy idea. I know we're looking at this many years many years later. But Smokestack plus Crucible of Worlds would have been crazy to run something like Darksteel Citadel in that, and then you can just sack the Citadel every turn, um, and then replay it. Okay. Soul Rings, Fear Resistance. Basically, this sort of deck is like the progenitor to, if you ever watch Pleasant Kenobi playing Death and Taxes, this is like the progenitor to that style of deck. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. So the problem is it says you've got 17 lands, but realistically you have 12 because you've got 1 Strip Mine and 4 Wastelands, none of which I would consider stable. But this entire deck's job is to basically price your opponent out from, in terms of mana, out from being able to play the game. In the meantime, you don't care about the increase in prices because, the increase in cost, because you've got so much stuff that can produce so much mana. Uh, I mean, I remember port being a thing in Legacy because you didn't have access to Strip Mine. And 4 Wasteland wasn't. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you would have at least top aided. Which is still going to be worth a lot. Because unfortunately, you also got to remember more than one person can figure out how to break a metagame. The funny thing is, I remember years ago in Standard, um, Lorwyn, I think we had. Did we have a Lara yet? I think we had Time Spiral and I think we had Time Spiral and was either Time Spiral and Lorwyn or we had Lorwyn and Alara. And out of like 100, I went to a regional, whatever the regional things were called back then. And out of 124 people, I think I came in somewhere around 20th or thereabouts. With a non-optimal mono red deck. And basically no testing. And I am sure that if I had done any amount of testing with that deck, like any actual amount of, like even a day of testing, I would have top aided. And if I'd done even a day worth of testing and had a optimal build of that deck, I think it's reasonable I could have won. I definitely would have been like I definitely would have been top 4, which, would have been the best showing in a major event, like for Bring Debt. Basically, anything higher than, F and M would have been the best showing I'd have ever had. The only person I ever remember from Mean Deck was Menendian. Although if you really want to be salty, I mean, you've got that right. Oh man, I want to see I want to see a non-basic land that allows you to run any number of copies in a deck. So like the same kind of ability that's on Relentless Rats and Slime Against Humanity and Persistent Petitioners and all that jazz. I want to see that kind of ability on a land. But yeah, Weatherseed Fairies, Weatherseed Fairies. I think the only thing that actually makes Weatherseed Fairies playable in Commander is that it's got the fairy type. I think that's really where it benefits the most. Although, to be fair, this is also back when color protection was a bigger deal. You want to be fair, if you want to build a deck with red cards or blue cards that got protection from red, ID equal U O colon protection from red. There's 8 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 natively, and then Joda's Avenger can turn around and get it. I think that would be a hilarious way to start building a deck. By the way, I only. You realize it took me going through Homelands, which was, I think, about 2 months ago now, because I'm doing one set per week. This is basically a blue silver knight for 2 more mana. But when you're talking blue, that's not completely unreasonable. This is silver knight in blue. It just costs more. For the longest time, I thought this was just, in general, a bad card because, or maybe, yeah, that might not be a bad idea. It's almost 2:30 in the morning in your neck of the woods. I hear sleep is a good plan. Oh my god, that reminds me. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Oh, I know where I can find it. Give me a moment. You? Excuse you? That one. Saved. What am I looking for? What am I looking for? No. Damn it. Okay. MTG Paradise Leap for the win. Damn it. It's a... Yeah, I'll see if I can find the link for you. I'm trying to find it quickly.